All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and to talk about the Unified Stormwater Rule and its relation to the rezoning process in Gowanus. It's been a really eventful year for Gowanus Canal Conservancy in terms of our advocacy. And I first want to just thank Melissa for her excellent presentation and overview of the rule, but also DEP. We're really excited about the Unified Stormwater Rule, and we really think this is a critical step for achieving water quality goals in Gowanus and citywide, especially in Gowanus in light of the proposed rezoning. We believe it will help us to achieve a net zero CSO condition in the Gowanus Canal. And today I'm just going to sort of give an overview of how GCC and DEP worked within the community through this rezoning process to meet water quality goals and to establish net zero CSO outcomes moving forward. So just a little background on GCC. We were founded in 2006, and we've been working for 10 years towards a vision for an open, clean, alive Gowanus Canal and watershed. We're the environmental steward for the Gowanus Canal watershed, but our work also includes the development of a master plan. This image here, the Gowanus Lowlands, it's a future vision for resilient and vibrant open space network on the canal. It engages the broader community in the process towards establishing a more accessible environment. And the master tool has really been a huge resource for us as we've been developing our advocacy priorities throughout this rezoning process. Just this presentation is going to mainly focus on the rezoning and kind of the Unified Stormwater Rule, but I also think it's important to note that there's a lot happening in Gowanus, and the master plan is really sort of looking at all of these ongoing processes that are catalyzing change, but also changing and shaping the future public realm. The Superfund cleanup is underway, green infrastructure and gray infrastructure investments throughout the watershed, and all of this under the lens of sea level rise and climate change impacts that we're feeling very much these days. And so the rezoning is the kind of imminent concern that we've been focused on over the last couple of years. And the Gowanus neighborhood plan is a proposal to rezone 80 blocks of the neighborhood for mixed use residential. It is projected to bring about 20,000 new residents to the Gowanus neighborhood. And this plan was approved by City Council and the Mayor's office in 2021. GCC's work has really been to understand the impacts of this rezoning, and the lens in which we've been looking at those are really informed by the historic hydrology. This is an area of former salt marsh. It's in a floodplain. We're very sensitive to that piece of this, these existing natural constraints, but also we pay a lot of attention to the existing infrastructure and where it's insufficient to serve the needs of the existing community and what that means in terms of impacts of development and additional population density. So we really try hard to understand the system. It's a very complicated thing to do. I think Melissa mentioned a lot of how difficult it is to look at these individual drainage systems. And we do our best to understand the watershed perspective. And our main driver has and probably always will be combined sewage overflow and water quality improvements in the canal. Ideally, we would love to get to a place where we have no more combined sewage entering our waterways. But right now, we're working on achieving the best water quality outcomes as are feasible. But CSOs are triggered in Gowanus 1 out of every 2 rainfall events. That's about 41 times a year. And I think, our big questions in this rezoning process is, what is the impact of added development when you have additional sanitary loads impacting a condition that's already detrimental to the canal and the surrounding environment? So today, the canal receives about 360 million gallons of combined sewage overflow per year. There are planned infrastructure investments underway, some of them under the Superfund program, for existing conditions that will eliminate a lot of the existing CSO. But our question has always been, what is the impact of this rezoning? 20,000 new residents, new toilets, and all the sanitary flow. So this is kind of where we have been focused for the last couple of years. And it led us to really establish this baseline demand for what we needed to see in this rezoning. And what we ended up asking for was a net zero combined sewer overflow, meaning new development cannot contribute additional combined sewage overflow to the canal. And we studied this both in the context of the watershed, but also looking at individual sites, looking at existing conditions, which are primarily industrial manufacturing and sort of a future mixed use residential situation where you have this increase in sanitary flows. We looked at this in the context of the existing stormwater performance standard, which does pose on-site stormwater management requirements for new development sites. But in our understanding of this, that wasn't going to be enough. There was still going to be an excess of sewage entering the canal. And so we sought to, make this net zero CS outcome a demand for our work. And we did this outreach throughout the community through our channels as part of the Gowanus Canal Conservancy, but we also partnered with a broader coalition of stakeholders through the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice. This diverse group of folks is everybody from public housing, industry, arts folks, environmental orgs, and it was really challenging, but over the past few years, we worked together to sort of streamline our priorities and goals for this proposed rezoning.
Amy,
yes.
Sorry, I'm so sorry to break in. You're still on your first slide, my dear.
Oh, really?
It happens.
Oh.
I was on something on Wednesday and the same thing happened to somebody.
What's going on?
I know.
I apologize. Thank you, Holly. Let me see.
Okay.
So many screens going on.
Yeah, maybe just reshare.
Okay. Sorry. I apologize. That's my fault.
It's not your fault. It happens. The world of Zoom.
Okay, so can you see?
There you go. Yep, we see Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition.
All right, I'll just
show
you these pictures. Darn, okay. This is what I was talking about. Here we are. All right, and so what I was getting to is through this work that we did with the Gowanus Neighborhood Coalition for Justice, we worked to establish deal breakers as part of the rezoning process. So there was 3 deal breakers, and they're listed here. The number 2 deal breaker, no pun intended, was asking for net zero CSO situation in the Gowanus Canal. So at the time that we started to do this outreach and, advocate for this net zero CSO outcome with agencies, elected officials, and throughout the community, we had many conversations with DEP who were working on the unified stormwater rule. So this was very early on in their process as they were establishing the rulemaking. And, it became really clear that this rule had a lot of opportunities to help meet this goal of net zero CSO. So early on, DEP presented the differences between the 2012 performance standard and what the 2021 unified stormwater rule would do. And Melissa did a great job of covering this, but in a nutshell, it's more stringent stormwater requirements, greater capture than the 10-year rainfall, slowing the release rates, and an infiltration first perspective that's going to amount in more green infrastructure. So we continued to do this advocacy since 2018 when the Gowanus framework was introduced, and it went through to this past November when the Gowanus rezoning was approved. And so this was lots of comments, public testimony, outreach around net zero CSO. And what we wanted to see DEP do was show us what the unified stormwater rule would look like in Gowanus. And we wanted this to be a part of the environmental impact statement for the rezoning process. And we wanted DEP to report on a net zero CSO outcome, not just overall, but by each individual CSO outfall. So in the draft environmental impact statement, DEP did provide a robust response to our demand, going above and beyond the seeker requirements, and showing a better than net zero CSO outcome, essentially about a 5 million gallon reduction in annual CSO volume. I think it's really important to note here that absent the new rule with the former performance standard in place, CSO would have actually increased by about 3 million gallons a year. So this new rule is really going to help us achieve this goal. And so I just wanted to kind of go over the advocacy wins and some of the really nuanced pieces that we think are important. So the points of agreement is a document that was established as a consensus document for city commitments through this rezoning process. And it includes 56 agreements, commitments from the city to do certain things that help us meet the resiliency, environmental justice goals for this rezoning. Many of them have to do with net zero CSO and long-term resiliency and infrastructure planning for the neighborhood. Specific to the unified stormwater rule, that's going to help us achieve net zero through this more stringent stormwater management requirements, ultimately resulting in a 5 million reduction per year. The critical piece in the points of agreement that I want to note here is that DEP is going to be tracking and reporting on this new rule through both the Green Infrastructure Annual Report, but also in summary for the Gowanus sewer shed. I think that is something we wanted to establish very early on in this process in order to really understand these modeling and all this complexity with every site development. We needed to sort of have a way of checking the incremental impacts. Additionally, the infiltration first hierarchy and the adaptive design standards are something that's really responsive to places like Gowanus, where you have a high water table, history of contaminated soils. There's more flexibility and innovation inherent in the types of practices that can be applied. And I think that this is kind of where we want to go in line with our vision towards a more integrated water management perspective for Gowanus, but also thinking about that citywide. And so that means looking at the hydrologic systems at all parts of the watershed, and thinking about the best practices that can really adapt to a local landscape. And I think Melissa went over these really well. Some of those hybrid systems are really going to benefit places like Gowanus, where you have these kind of pre-existing constrained site conditions. A couple other things that I want to mention, because the Unified Stormwater Rule is great and it's going to do a lot in terms of meeting our water quality goals. It's a multi-pronged approach that's really going to get us to where we need to be. And other pieces of the points of agreement, commitments that the city has made to further think about this adaptation that's necessary and planning for the future. One is committing to a cloudburst study, which is going to assess stormwater flow paths in the Gowanus watershed and provide priorities for future infrastructure development, really looking at addressing the hydrology and flood resiliency issues. And this is something that the Gowanus community has been asking for many, many years. And finally, also capital investments, $174 million upgrades for sewer infrastructure in places that are hit the hardest during extreme weather in Gowanus. And so I think I just highlight these because I think the Unified Stormwater Rule is a piece, but it's really sort of a broader kind of thinking across the watershed that's going to help to kind of move this into the future in the way that we need to. So that's what I have today. Apologies for the slide issues. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you.